Good afternoon, Scott Baker.
Mikey Ames, good afternoon to you. It is 3 o'clock Eastern Time here on Tuesday, November 4th. That would be Election Day in a lot of the United States of America, but we have folks that listen and read us all around the world, 185 countries listening to Field Notes. And so Lead Better, dedicated to the proposition that as we discuss the Field Notes, we make them more real to us, we make them more applicable to us. And so let's dive into today's, which is number 1608, and it's don't cast team obligations as goals during the review and planning process. Big chunky words in this one, including obligation, which sounds pretty heavy and like full of responsibility and probably not much fun to talk about.
Yeah, well, it made me think immediately, is there ever a time that we should cast obligations as goals? I mean, I know that we're qualifying it even in the headline. We're talking about during the review and planning process, but I don't know if we needed to qualify it that way. Is there
Maybe
an
not.
that maybe obligations should always or should never be thought of as goals, right?
Yeah. I'm pre-warning that I might sneeze here at some point.
You feel it coming on?
I'm not allergic to you or the conversation, but maybe I might have suppressed it. So, yeah. Now, look, I do think like an obligation, like if there is somebody has said that even the word responsibility has a bit of weight to it. And they've also played around with the idea that responsibility is really the ability to respond. What am I going to do because of this? And an obligation is saying there's an expectation here. And I think that's really it. So at the heart of this field note is a very simple thing, which is in some organizations, the things that we would say, that's just the way it is around here. We can't say that here we are getting into Q4 to say, all right, what are our expectations for 2026 for our team? And what I'd like to see is a little more respect. And You'd be like, yeah, let's make how we respect each other. I'm going to have to stop slapping my colleagues as much next year.
Yeah, right.
Not going to be the best goal for next year.
Right. No, there's a philosophical way to talk about obligations, and then there's a very practical way to talk about obligations. So
okay,
when it's talked about here in the field note, this headline seems to be like we could practically say we're talking about obligations here. So another way that we might say it is, don't cast your team's job descriptions as goals during the review and planning process.
Yeah, job descriptions. This is what we expect you to do.
Right.
Now, we'd love to also do this.
Yes.
We'd like to get to here. And that's where you get into stretch goals and all those things that make me kind of feel weird. But I think I first encountered this years ago before I kind of knew admired leadership, and I do consider it to be a light bulb moment for me. And in an organization that I was working in, and I realized it had kind of grown from me to a large number of people, and I was particularly managing one aspect of that organization. And I kind of sat down to say, well, what is our team going to do in connection to this larger team? And we kind of polled the team and what's important, kind of like people do when they're putting together mission statements. And what happens is when you open the door like that, you just get a lot of words that are kind of blah, 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 blah. And so you'd be like, yeah, we're going to be committed to excellence and respect, and we're going to try to be service oriented. And it just starts to not mean anything. And then I think it was in Lencioni's book, The Advantage, that the idea that, well, some of these are just pay to play. Like some of these are like, this just gets you in the door. This actually isn't like, it's not like if you're joined the soccer team, you'd be like, today what we're going to work on is not picking up the ball with our hands. No, that's not going to work. Yeah. Right. So when you say, well, let's separate out all the things that are givens, now we have an opportunity to look and say, well, what are the things that we are uniquely gifted and seem to be good at compared to our competitors? And now can we set some real goals on how we can make some world-class gains in those areas? Different ballgame.
It is, but it needs to be said out loud. If you haven't actually had the conversation about the obligations of the role,
that is true. Yeah.
Then you do need to have that conversation. Just don't confuse them with the goals, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
And the biggest issue for a lot of like the obligations of leadership, for instance, was something that I had never considered until I saw it basically in the philosophical framework of admired leadership. It's in those initial 5 behavioral videos.
Right. Yeah.
So our whole approach to leadership and leadership development mentions the idea of leaders accepting and considering, maybe for the first time in their life, the obligations that come with leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we don't actually spell those out. And I think it's because they're value driven, and you need to
the values might be
value.
different. Yeah.
Right. But taking time to consider what the obligations of your role are is a thing that, like, when you're up for a promotion, like, people hardly ever stop and say, okay, before I officially offer you this promotion, let's just talk about the obligations that come with this role. Right. I don't know that anyone has ever talked to me about something like that. And in many HR organizations, it probably doesn't even come up that way. Right.
Yeah.
You talk about job descriptions. Again, that's the practical part, but the philosophical part is almost more important there, to say, like, like, are we going to just constantly be arguing over whether or not you're working overtime, right? Or that you're putting in extra hours?
Mm-hmm.
There's an obligation that comes with this role that you're going to accept, that you don't complain about working overtime, right?
Right. Depending on the organization. Some organizations, that's not the value. And I saw it in an article the other day about just in the AI culture, and a lot of the acqui-hires that are going on, like, they're actually putting it into employment contracts. You might have to work 80 or 100 hours that week, and that we don't expect you to be complaining about this. This is what the job is.
Yeah.
And you kind of know that when you sign up. Now, I do think that your point about, and we don't want to brush by this point of saying, like, what's being laid out, this is more than just like, did we go over your job description? The whole point that I think in the advantage, the idea of saying, well, there are some sort of pay to play values. We take those for granted, that we're not going to be breaking the law. We're going to treat each other like human beings. And that then we're going to be looking for certain distinctives, because when we look at those distinctives and we say, and by the way, part of that drill is saying, well, let's say your team's been together for a while. Mm-hmm. And you've been doing really good work for a couple of years, and you start looking around and you start saying, well, what are the best qualities of what I'm seeing in our team? If I think about the best players on the team, what do they exemplify? What are the characteristics? How do they go about doing what they do? So when we say people like us do things like this, what do we mean by that? Because when you start to get words around that, you start to get a picture of what that organization is. And then what happens? We just had this big community conference on searching and finding extraordinary talent, and how you attract people, and how you know who's right for your organization, how you know who's not right for your organization, is going to be really driven by that question. What are the unique characteristics about how people in your organization go about doing what they do? Now, you might have these sort of pay-to-play values. You can't also assume that the values for the organization are what we would call aspirational if they're not true. You can't be like, well, someday we hope to respect one another.
Yeah, some roles.
Gosh. Yeah.
These kinds of things take on an outsized view of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like doctors, for instance. Doctors, we all think of doctors as those who've accepted the Hippocratic Oath. Now,
yes, right. Yeah.
Whether there's actually an oath to take, and whether it's actually more broad than do no harm, it creates implications that are these obligations for all doctors. And there's almost like a social contract that you accept just by putting on the white coat, right?
Yeah, right.
That says you better meet those obligations. Otherwise, you're going to be thought of as a hypocrite simply because you've violated the obligations of being a doctor, whether it's a real oath or not, right? Journalism, same way, right? There is this, and the more you read about how journalists actually put together a fine story, I think of it, and I don't know that most people think of it this way, but I think a journalist is obligated to have at least 2 independent sources, right? At least, right?
Yeah, it's not just commentary.
Yeah.
That's why you're a reporter.
Yeah, right. And so you're not just reporting on what the quote is that someone said. You're also verifying the quote, and you're doing these type of things ahead of time. Like, don't even call yourself a journalist if you're not going to meet that small standard of excellence, right? And it's not even excellence at this point. It's just like minimum obligation, but an obligation, right?
Right.
leaders should have that obligation, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
think a leader's standard of excellence is oftentimes determined by their team instead of by the leader itself. And then it's just kind of implied. And that's a sad way to go about it. There ought to be some version of a Hippocratic oath that comes upon leaders. Now, again, all this is philosophical. We're like in the nuts and nitty gritty, the field note really isn't about this, right? But it does go to say, you better not be casting those goals for the year as like, I'm finally going to meet my obligations as a leader, right?
Yeah, right.
That should have been done a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, and even as you indicated that we often say admire leadership, and the behavioral approach we take is in some ways agnostic to values. There's a lot of different value sets leaders might bring to the equation. There are still some frameworks that we would say and some umbrella principles around the idea of leadership. And Alan talks about this in our platform around just that when I'm a leader, when I take on that name, that mantle, that implies that I've made a decision, that I have some responsibility for your goals and your dreams and your aspirations, and that there's an obligation in our relationship, and that needs to be taken seriously by me. Yes. It's not just, I now have a position and you have to do what I say.
Right.
Wrong definition of leadership. So the one thing that I would like to kind of underline in this is even as we say there's a job description, and as you set the goals for next year, try not to make the goals for next year things that should just be assumptions. First of all, those assumptions might be vitally important about the characteristics of that team, but we're just getting started on what's exciting. And so that should be what's happening with you as a leader and for what you're communicating to the team, which is saying, here's who we are. This is the jersey that we're all wearing. Here's where we need to go. And it looks like, in terms of our conversations as a team, we're particularly strong doing this and this and this. These are things that have separated us out in the minds of our clients and our customers and those we serve, whatever those things are. And when we look at where we've grown, and here's some things that haven't worked as well. So when we look at what's happening in 2026, I think that if we as a team come together around this, and that's going to mean that you need to do this, and I need you to do this, and you told me that you think you're going to shift over here, and I'm listening, and it's a conversation all directions. Everybody that gets into that conversation, there's an enthusiasm that can be built around that even as I start to talk about what it means to be the day-to-day participant in the team, it no longer sounds like an obligation, right? It sounds more like when they talk about in the book Legacy, getting drafted and getting brought onto the team that you're playing rugby for the All Blacks in New Zealand. And you're handed a jersey. And the implications of the legacy of that jersey means so much that it's awe-inspiring, and that your job is to leave that jersey in a better place. Right? That's what it should feel like when you get hired into an organization. That's what it should actually feel like when you start to set the real goals for next year.
Yeah. But unless Kyle Shanahan, who's the coach of the 49ers, unless he says out loud, I'm recruiting wide receivers who block downfield, right? Unless he says that early on in the recruiting process, like pre-draft, right? So that every wide receiver who comes into the organization knows that they don't take plays off. They better be blocking downfield, right? But like, dirty little secret, a lot of wide receivers don't block downfield.
No block, yeah.
Right?
I could name some, yeah.
Right, yes. But as we understand that, like, if this is what Kyle wants for the culture of his team, even though it's blocking and tackling, even though it's just the minimum obligation, it has nothing to do with goals, he has to say it all the time.
Yes, right.
In order for it to really inculcate itself as the culture.
Well, another great lesson, by the way, in the point that you just made, which is true in the book Legacy, if you haven't read it, it's true in The Advantage, it's true in Admired Leadership, which is the things that we use to name things, make them real. And they shouldn't sound like buzzwords. They shouldn't sound like corporate blather. They should sound like active things, and that you should be able to see them on video. And that's a behavioral thing to say, our expectation is that our receivers block downfield. Got it. Not going to forget it. Right.
And it's easy not to, right? It's easy to take a play off. It's easy to. But when you can always go back to, do you remember? Right? And you're saying it every year to the rookies anyway, and you're saying it to the new recruits. You got to be saying it all the time. So,
All right,
yeah.
I have the headline for tomorrow. Do you want it in advance just to kind of start thinking about it?
Yes, I haven't seen it yet at all. Please.
It is this: your leadership role opens up new conversations if you let it.
Oh, okay. Well, we kind of just talked about that today. It'll be an
Dynamite.
interesting angle for tomorrow. Okay. Bye now.
Thanks, Mike.